Hi everyone, this is Ted Bauman here, editor of the Bauman Letter. One of the things that I cover in my writings on occasion is issues that are of concern to people who live outside the United States, Americans who live outside the United States, including people who are green card holders. And one of the key issues that has been really a major problem for many Americans living abroad is the IRS's requirement that you report foreign income and foreign bank accounts to the IRS. And this is under a law that's known as the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. Now, the law was designed to disrupt people from storing money in Swiss bank accounts and getting away with it. But as always is the case, far more people are getting caught up in this kind of reporting requirement than the law initially intended. For example, people who happen to be dual citizens of the United States, who, through no fault of their own, maybe if you were born in the United States while your parents were in transit, you become a U.S. citizen. And as a U.S. citizen, you are responsible for paying taxes on your income from anywhere in the world, regardless of where you earn it. Recently, for example, Boris Johnson, who was once the mayor of London, was required to pay a substantial back taxes and penalty to the United States, even though he'd never lived here, simply because he happened to be born here. He then renounced his citizenship, which is something, in fact, that hundreds of thousands of Americans have done over the last 20 years or so, and the numbers are climbing every year. Now, unfortunately, there is one more bit of bad news associated with this. In 1999, the IRS began to think about how they could encourage people to report back taxes without getting into too much trouble. So they developed a number of reporting programs that are designed basically to say, look, we'll reduce the penalties if you come forward voluntarily. Now, in 2012, the IRS put together a program like that for U.S. people who have accounts outside the United States. It's called the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Program, or OVDP. Now, the idea behind the OVDP was that if you came forward and said, well, I actually do have U.S. accounts outside the United States, or rather bank accounts outside the United States, or I have interest in a company outside the United States, or I own property outside the United States through a LLC or something like that, anything that constitutes a financial holding in a foreign country, if you report that voluntarily, the IRS will limit the penalty that they impose on you. Now, we've just learned that the IRS is planning actually to end this program in September this year. There's no explanation for why they're doing it, but basically you have until September this year to take advantage of this program if you have not reported foreign financial holdings. Now, let's talk about the circumstances under which you might be responsible for making these reports and what would happen if you don't. Well, first of all, take my case, for example. I'm a dual South African U.S. citizen. I have bank accounts in both countries. If I have at any time during the year more than $10,000 worth of money in whatever currency in a South African bank account, I have to report that to the Treasury Department. As a U.S. resident, if I have more than $250,000 $50,000 in a foreign account as I'm living in the United States, then I have to report that under FATCA. If you are actually living outside the United States, right, and you don't pass what's called the residence test to be considered a tax resident in the U.S., the numbers go up. They go up to, I think, around $250,000 a year. So anything over than that, you have to report. Otherwise, you get major penalties. Now, there are a number of cases where people simply don't know that they have to do this. I mentioned one earlier about Boris Johnson having been accidentally born in the U.S. and having to pay the IRS taxes and penalties for not having filed taxes over the years. Well, many people fall into that camp. But what's happening is that the IRS is making it more and more difficult for people to claim that they just didn't know or they didn't do this willfully. So essentially what's happening now is that people who are outside the United States or even inside the United States but have foreign bank accounts and for whatever reason have not reported them to the IRS, you have until September to do it. Now, unfortunately, I don't think you have much choice. The IRS and the FATCA legislation allows the United States basically to demand information about U.S. bank account holders from any bank anywhere in the world that is signed up with the FATCA program. And if they don't sign up with the FATCA program, they lose access to the U.S. banking system, which is a real drag. So essentially what's happened now is that the net has closed. You have until September. If you have not reported, you need to report. Now, I would suggest that if you feel that you are going to take advantage of the OVDP, the Offshore Voluntary Disclosure Program, do it through an attorney. Don't just go to an accountant and try to do it yourself, handle the legal part. You want to talk to a tax attorney because they can help you to come up with the best language that is most likely to enable the IRS to conclude that your violation was not willful. A lawyer can, of course, hire an accountant to do all that, the number crunching part of it, but you really do want to have an attorney draft the language and approach the IRS on your behalf. So the bad news is the program is ending in September. You have until then if you do have any unreported offshore bank accounts. The Bauman letter, and particularly the Bauman letter archives, cover the various cases that you might face living outside the United States or living inside the United States with offshore investments. And there's plenty of descriptions of how FATCA works, how the reporting works on my website. So if you think that this might affect you, I strongly encourage you to get your act together now and look for an attorney to help you make your reports. This is Ted Bauman signing off. I'll talk to you again soon.